Back in Hollywood's golden age, Westerns weren't just movies. They were a cultural force. And if every cowboy needed a sidekick, Gabby Hayes was a gold standard. He rode alongside icons like Roy Rogers and Randolph Scott, delivering rough-edged wisdom and memorable one-liners in that trademark gravelly voice. But behind the beard and the laughs, Gabby had stories he never shared, until now. For years, fans whispered about what really happened between Hayes and the famously reserved Randolph Scott. Why did their on-screen bond suddenly fade? Was there more behind the scenes than just frontier friendship? After decades of silence, Gabby Hayes finally opened up, and what he revealed caught everyone off guard. Back in Hollywood's golden age, Westerns dominated the screen, and every cowboy needed a loyal sidekick. Among the many who filled that role, Gabby Hayes stood out. When it comes to classic Western sidekicks, his name consistently ranks near the top, a staple of the genre's golden era. Gabby Hayes was born George Francis Hayes on May 7, 1885. He was the third of 7 kids in a big family headed up by Elizabeth and Clark Hayes. Though he often said he was from Wellsville, New York, he was actually born in a little town called Stanitz, tucked away in the western part of the state, not far from Pennsylvania. His dad was a busy man. He ran the Hayes Hotel and also dipped his toes into the oil business, which was just started booming in that region. George grew up surrounded by his siblings, brothers William, Morrison, and Clark, and sisters Nellie and Hattie. His brother Morrison served in the U.S. Army and was tragically killed in action during World War I. George himself had a pretty normal small-town childhood. He went to school in Stanitz, and even back then was already showing signs of having big dreams. While still in high school, he played semi-pro baseball, but he wasn't content to stay put. At just 17, he packed his bags and left home chasing something more exciting. He started off with a traveling stock company, even spent some time working with a circus, and eventually found his groove in vaudeville. He was a hit on stage, especially in comedy sketches where he'd play a bumbling character known as the Rube Constable. That vaudeville career kept him busy and successful for years. In 1914, George married Olive E. Ireland, whose father worked as a glass finisher. Olive didn't just stay on the sidelines. She jumped into showbiz too, performing alongside her husband under the stage name Dorothy Earle. Just to clear things up, she wasn't the same Dorothy Earle, who worked in film as a writer and actress. By the time 1928 rolled around, George was doing well enough to retire early. He and Olive settled into a home in Baldwin, Long Island, thinking they could finally relax. But then the Great Depression hit, and like so many others, George lost everything in the 1929 stock market crash. Just like that, their retirement plans were gone. That's when Olive came up with a new idea. She urged George to give film acting a shot. So together, they packed up their lives and took a leap, heading west of Los Angeles. When Hayes made the move to Los Angeles, he landed in Hollywood right as the silent film era was fading out. He started off grabbing small parts, bit roles, background characters, whatever he could get. Nothing major at first. But then he had this lucky run-in with a producer named T.M. Carr. Something about Hayes' look caught Carr's attention, and next thing you know, Carr had cast him in around 30 films over the next 6 years. In the early days, Hayes played all kinds of characters, even the bad guys. Sometimes he'd even pop up as 2 different people in the same movie. But Westerns were really where he found his groove. Those were the golden days of serial Westerns, where the same familiar faces and sidekicks kept coming back in each film. Hayes fit right in, even though he wasn't a cowboy off-screen. In fact, he didn't learn how to ride a horse until he was in his 40s. Off-camera, Hayes was nothing like the dusty, grumbling characters he played. He was clean-cut, articulate, and carried himself with a polished air. Funny enough, he wasn't even a fan of Westerns. He found them repetitive, which, to be fair, a lot of those B-movies kind of were. Still, audiences loved him in that scrappy, wisecracking sidekick role. He became known for tossing around phrases like "consarnit," "yattern," "tootin," "dadjamit," "dern persnickety female," and "young whippersnapper." Between 1935 and 1939, he played Windy Halliday, the wisecracking sidekick to William Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy, and quickly became a familiar face in the Western world. But in '39, after a salary dispute with Paramount Pictures, he walked away from the role. He didn't sit out for long, though. That same year, he made a pivotal move to Republic Pictures. There was just one snag. Paramount still owned the name Wendy Halliday, so Republic rebranded him as Gabby Whitaker. Same crusty attitude, same lovable sidekick, just a new name. His first outing under the new banner was South for Ho, riding alongside Roy Rogers. That film marked the beginning of a legendary run. Between 1938 and 1943, Gabby Hayes and Roy Rogers teamed up for an astonishing 41 films, a partnership that still stands as one of the most prolific in Western film history. Their chemistry lit up the screen. Gabby wasn't just comic relief. He was sharp, full of wisdom, and often the one pointing the hero in the right direction. Even though he switched character names from movie to movie, his vibe never changed. Grumpy but loyal, with a knack for saying exactly what needed to be said. Their partnership started with Under Western Stars and turned into a Western movie machine. Hits like Red River Valley, Sunset Serenade, and Man from Cheyenne just kept coming. Audiences couldn't get enough. Roy was already on the rise, but even he credited Gabby for helping him grow as an actor. Where Roy brought the charm and quiet confidence, Gabby added color, warmth, and humor that gave those films their magic. Sure, there were other great duos from the era. Gene Autry and Smiley Burnett brought a musical twist to the cowboy formula, while William Boyd's Hopalong Cassidy had a rotating crew of sidekicks, including Gabby Hayes before his time with Rogers. But none had the consistency or emotional pull of the Rogers-Hayes team. They weren't just stars. They were a comfort. Their movies felt like checking in with old friends, especially during tough times. They reminded people that good would always win, no matter how rough the ride. Hayes spent much of his career playing the dependable sidekick, and when it came to Western royalty, he shared the saddle with some of the greats. He partnered with Randolph Scott in 6 films, including one of their standout collaborations, 1940's excess Bad Man's Territory. Now, Bad Man's Territory wasn't exactly aiming for subtlety. This was a black-and-white B-Western that tried to turn heads by tossing together every infamous outlaw the screenwriters could find. Jesse James, Bellstar, the Dalton Gang, Sam Bass, you name it, they were there. Randolph Scott played a straight-laced Texas sheriff on a mission to civilize the wild borderlands and make them part of the Oklahoma Territory. Under director Tim Whalen's enthusiastic but somewhat chaotic hand, the movie raced from shootouts to political intrigue, with plenty of Western tropes packed into its runtime. The story kicked off with the James Gang robbing a train in broad daylight. Hot on their trail was Sheriff Mark Rowley, played by Scott, alongside his younger brother and Deputy John and another deputy named Mercer. Enter the crooked U.S. Marshal Bill Hampton, who tried steering the posse the wrong way, but they weren't buying it. They stayed on course and captured outlaw lookout Kid Coyote, played of course by Hayes. Things spiraled quickly. Mercer was gunned down by outlaw Hank McGee, and when John tried escorting Kid Coyote back to town, Hampton tried to murder them both. Out of nowhere, Jesse James stepped in to stop him and took the wounded John to the outlaw haven of Quinto. Meanwhile, Hampton twisted the story, framing John as a member of the James Gang, prompting Sheriff Mark to ride into Bad Man's Territory alone to clear his brother's name. Along the way, Mark crossed paths with Henriette Alcott, a determined English journalist played by Ann Richards. Romance bloomed naturally, and she joined the mission to bring justice to Quinto by rallying citizens to join the new Oklahoma Territory. The film zigzagged through outlaw meetings, square dances, political appointments, and horse races, ending with the bad guys turning the tables by putting Hampton in charge of law enforcement and making the Rowley brothers the outlaws. Despite the chaotic plot, the film was a box office hit, raking in over $500,000 in profit. It even caught the attention of Variety, which praised it as good entertainment for adult audiences. The success pushed producer Nat Holt and Randolph Scott to re-team for Trail Street in 1947, another Western laced with real-life figures. Shifting again from goofy charm to serious storytelling, Trail Street, directed by Ray Enright. The characters lacked depth, and the love triangle was resolved with a whimper instead of a bang. Even the sweeping Oklahoma land finale couldn't quite pull it all together. By the late 1940s, though, The sun was starting to set on the Western boom. Tastes were shifting, and the demand wasn't what it used to be. That's when they saddled up for one last ride in 1950's The Caribou Trail. This wasn't just a dusty saloon brawl of a movie. It was a frontier adventure with a northern twist, set in the rugged Canadian wilderness instead of the usual tumbleweed towns of the American West. The star of the show, Randolph Scott, one of the steadiest hands in Hollywood. He was backed by a whole posse of recognizable faces. Dale Robertson, Jim Davis, Bill Williams, and of course, Gabby Hayes himself. The ever-reliable Victor Jory played the villain Frank Walsh, while supporting players like Douglas Kennedy and James Griffith rounded out the crew. Karen Booth brought charm and a little romantic tension as the saloon owner Frankency. Now the story kicks off with Jim Redfern, Scott's character, dreaming of greener pastures. He and his two pals, Mike, played by Williams, and Ling Li Tung Fu, are driving cattle from Montana to British Columbia along the historic Caribou Trail. But they hit trouble fast. They try to cross a toll bridge run by the corrupt Frank Walsh without coughing up cash, and in return, Walsh's goons stampede their herd. Chaos follows. Mike loses an arm. The cattle are gone, their big dreams crushed. At least for now. Jim, Ling, and their new mountain man buddy Grizzly, that's Hayes, try to start over by turning to gold prospecting. Just when it seems like things might turn around, they're captured by indigenous warriors. They escape, but not together. Jim ends up alone, surviving the wilderness until he stumbles upon a creek glittering with enough gold to make a new life. Soon, the crew regroups. They link up with Grizzly's relatives, Martha and Jane, plus a no-nonsense foreman named Will. Together, they form a new cattle venture, aiming to drive a fresh herd into that gold-filled valley Jim found. But old enemies haven't forgotten them. Walsh and his men are lurking, ready to make life difficult. And then there's Frankency. She's got a soft spot for Jim, but Walsh wants her too. That love triangle adds an extra dose of tension to the already rough trail ahead. The Caribou Trail may not have aimed for the Oscars, but it delivered solid entertainment. At just 81 minutes, it packs in enough plot twists, showdowns, and cattle drives to satisfy any Western fan. Nat Holt handled production, with 20th Century Fox taking care of distribution. Visually, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some scenes look absolutely gorgeous, especially the second unit shots filmed out in Colorado. But most of the main cast never left California. Indoor soundstage scenes are mixed with real outdoor footage shot in places like Bronson Canyon in LA's Griffith Park. If you've hiked there, you'll definitely recognize the backdrop. And here's a fun tech tidbit. The film was originally shot in 2-strip Cinecolor, but for decades, most people only saw it in black and white. That changed when Kino Lorber restored it to its original color after over a year of work. Now you can finally watch the Caribou Trail the way it was meant to be seen. Dusty trails, golden valleys, and all. After his run on the silver screen with the Caribou Trail, Gabby Hayes did something not every cowboy did. He rode straight into America's living rooms. That's right, he made the leap to television, kicking things off with the Gabby Hayes Show. Now, this wasn't just any Western. It originally started out in 1950 under a different name, The Quaker Oats Show, because yes, our man Gabby was teamed up with a bowl of breakfast oats. Picture it. 1950. Kids huddled around the TV, eyes wide, as Gabby Hayes appeared on screen perched in a general store in a dusty little place called Quaker Canyon. He'd be whittling away, spinning yarns that somehow always circled back to cereal. And in one unforgettable bit of TV history, Gabby would ask viewers to step back from the screen, then fire a cannon loaded with cereal right at it. This was their fun way of playing off the Quaker Oats slogan, "Shot from guns." And yes, the name of the show changed to the Gabby Hayes Show in 1951, but the charm stayed the same. This live half-hour show wasn't just yeehaw and slapstick. Each episode focused on historical events. Horton Foote and Jerome Coopersmith wrote the scripts, and they were filmed live in NBC Studio 3A at Rockefeller Center, all on a modest budget of about $5,500 per episode. Yet despite the tight purse strings, by the end of 1950, people in 39 cities across the U.S. were tuning in to watch Gabby spin tales about the Lewis and Clark expedition, Buffalo Bill as a boy, the Battle of the Alamo, and more. Then, in December 19th, 51, NBC launched a brand new version of the Gabby Hayes Show, this time in a quicker 15-minute weekday format. At first, it aired 3 times a week, but soon it became a daily fixture at 5:15 p.m. The format: Gabby would tell these hilarious tall tales about his imaginary wild family, and in between his stories, they'd cut to scenes from classic B-westerns. Since the show was so short, they'd stretch a single movie across a whole week. And just when you thought it was over, Gabby would pop back up with another knee-slapping tale. In early 1952, the show featured rising stars like Ross Martin as Wyatt Earp and Betty Garrett as Belle Starr. But TV schedules are tricky, and by January 27, 1952, the Sunday edition of Gabby's show was canceled. Still, the weekday version held strong until January 1st, 1954. Even after that, Gabby didn't hang up his spurs just yet. When Buffalo Bob Smith had to step away from the Howdy Doody show to recover from a heart attack, who filled in? None other than Gabby himself. And in true cowboy fashion, Gabby wasn't just a TV host. He ran a summer ranch camp for boys and girls in East Jewett, New York, fittingly named the Gabby Hayes Ranch. But Gabby's legacy wasn't just on screen. From the late 1940s through the 1950s, Charlton and Fawcett published a whole comic book series in his name. And even after he retired from regular television, he kept popping up here and there, especially on Howdy Doody, catching up with his old pal Buffalo Bob. Now behind a bushy beard and those gruff on-screen rants was a man deeply in love with his wife. They were married for 43 years, and she was his everything. While directors might have given him notes on his performance, it was only his wife's opinion that truly mattered. Sadly, she passed away on July 5th, 1957, and Gabby was left absolutely devastated. They never had children, which made the loss hit even harder. After her death, he spent some time living at his Tahunga Lake Ranch in California, later moving into a small apartment building he owned. As the years went by, Gabby's health started to decline. In early 1969, he was admitted to St. Joseph Hospital in Burbank to receive treatment for heart disease. Just a week later, on February 9, 1969, he passed away at the age of 83. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Cemetery. Thank you for watching.